Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am Rob of the Lair of OmnusI with another topic word for RPGaDay 2019, courtesy of the RPG Brigade of Facebook. Today, on the 19th of August, today the word is scary. So, scary is kind of an interesting word when applied to role-playing games and gaming in general. Largely because scary is hard to do. You might think, oh my gosh, there are so many horror games out there and things. There's Call of Cthulhu. There's some scary things from Lamentations of the Flame Princess. There's really scary games out there. And I will say, yes and no. Yes, there are games with scary topics, certainly. There are games with themes that may make you uncomfortable. And certainly there are outcomes for your characters that might be horrific to contemplate. But there's no such thing as a scary game. There are games that can scare you if they are run in a way that could scare you. But a person who just walks in cold into a game of, say, Call of Cthulhu, and your character sees a Byaki and goes mad. Okay. It's not inherently scary. Running the game does not scare you. Running the game in a certain way can. And I don't run a great deal of horror, but I have learned a few things, and I feel comfortable passing many of these things on to you. The single most important thing about running something that can be considered scary is, and unequivocally this is essential, you need to make the players care. If there is no investment, you will not be able to scare them. They will not feel any sensation of fear if they have nothing to lose that they care about. And that's hard in a game. It is. If you just rolled up a character, you haven't had a chance to really learn to love that character yet. There's no investiture. So, if that character runs off to their death in the first night, oh well, I'll make up another one. It's not that hard. This is unfortunate. And unfortunately, in some of these games that I've heard stories of, where the keeper just wants to grind the players down by, okay, well, you guys got together, all of a sudden Shoggoths attack. Your characters die, roll up new characters. That's not scary. That's a quick combat encounter that's incredibly one-sided and your characters die. That is not going to scare anyone. That's mostly just going to frustrate your players. But you need to make them care. First of all, characters are inherently more sympathetic if they do survive for a while, if they have good things that happen that your players can attach to. If everything is always horror and your characters feel they'll never get ahead, you're not going to generate a great deal of sympathy for them, especially if it's laughably one-sided. Inept characters, unless they are valiantly struggling against a dark fate, are hard to sympathize with. You want to root for guys and ladies, of course, who have something laudable about them. Otherwise, they're just hapless boobs who get crushed. So, you want to celebrate the things that a character does well. If the character is a bookish professor, you've got to give them clues that let that character succeed and impact the story. You don't want to crush them in infirmity and highlight the things they can't do. You need to let them succeed every now and again so that they feel like they're getting closer and closer to success. That is one important way on forming bonds. Likewise, if the thing that is threatened is an NPC, and the players are working towards the preservation of an NPC or to unravel a mystery, if they come in cold, what do the players care? If it's the aunt of your character and she's being threatened. Your character, you would hope, would care, but it's hard to make the player care about somebody that the character should care about. Unless they meet the character is sympathetic, they've had some interaction, they've proven useful or endearing in some way to the players. Then when something happens, there's a bit of a bond that is formed. If that character's been around for a couple of sessions and has always come through when the players needed them, then you have more bonds form, and then something threatens to pull that apart, it's more painful of a wound if it actually occurs, see? And they will then have something to be scared of, a loss. Albeit it's an imaginary person who doesn't really exist, but in the shared experience that they have, there could be genuine fear there. If you are going to create a world where everything is evil all the time, and there's always demons lying in the shadows, it's very easy to get overwhelmed. It's very easy to grind your players down, to stop caring. Eventually they just, okay, you'll do whatever you'll want to do anyhow. If every time somebody goes off to do something on their own, they get jumped, your world is too dark for anybody to care, because there's no light to protect. But if you let people be themselves and let the world be a little bit more realistic, it's that much scarier when it all flips around and they enter the nightmare world of realizing what true horror is. So bonds are essential. If you don't have bonds with your characters, you're never going to get anybody scared or invested. That's the single most important thing. After that is atmosphere. Atmosphere is probably easier to generate because, quite honestly, if you control the space, then you can set the atmosphere with all kinds of little tips and tricks. If you guys all go out to the coffee shop to play or the hobby shop and there's noises around, then it's hard. It could be downright impossible to really do a good job of setting an atmosphere. You're going to have to lean much more heavily on your players' imaginations. But if you can make the room more uncomfortable, it's hard to be scared when you're sitting in your familiar, comfortable chair and you've got your dice right there and your character sheet and you can see everything and you take it all in, but you've got your friends around you. Anything you can do to shake that up will help with the atmosphere. Spooky music at appropriate times. Not all the time, because then it's just background noise. If you play thematically appropriate noises, just to dig at that comfort level. Just excavate it a little bit at a time. Rub at the mortar of the foundations that they find comfort in. Perhaps it's a time when you turn the lights down so they can't see everybody so easily. And when they do, familiar faces that are masked in shadow aren't nearly as comforting. Maybe use more candlelight instead of bright electric light that everybody can see each other. Maybe you go to candles for a night and see what that does for it. I guarantee you it'll change the mood a bit. Now, especially if you have colored lights. You know, reds and purples providing contrasting color. Maybe black light to make bright colors just pop. There's a lot you can do in that. Now back it up with a spooky soundtrack and occasional things, distractions, things to shake them out of their comfort zone. And you can get some genuine, at least jump scares and startles, if not true fear. But if you've already gotten bonds set in place, and you amplify their already concerned state, you can jump to that gap into something spooky and fearful. For instance, if they're worried about the aunt of a character who has been a kindly old lady, if a little eccentric, in an endearing way, and you've got everything down to candlelight, maybe some sepia tone filters, you know, giving some light enough that people can see their character sheets yet. Maybe just a pool of light in the middle of the table, but the players are all sitting around in semi-darkness. You've got the sound of wind whistling through the trees as they're driving along the New England back roads out to Dartsman Cast, where she has her manor that she lives in. It's dilapidated, of course. The servants haven't been working in a decade. The house has been slowly crumbling around her. She does what she can, but she's a little bit old, and her eccentricities stop her from... She never goes into rooms with a certain color if she can avoid it, because they're unlucky, and she's convinced that she'll die in one of these rooms, so she stays out of them. And then, as they're driving along, that's when you surreptitiously hit the soundboard on your phone, and that's when you hear a piercing scream. It comes out from the phone, not from you. All of a sudden, everybody jumps. Oh my gosh, the worst has happened. Something has finally gone after the aunt. And you have just generated fear as the bond is threatened, and you've done everything to amplify the atmosphere. You can get true fear if your players are into that kind of thing. So these are just tips and tricks. This is relatively mine. Obviously, you can go even further than that. Having your players in costumes, for example, and having a few things. Like if you were going to run a role-playing game based on Clue, and you actually handed out a derringer, not a real one, something that looks realistic, but no. A candlestick, a rope, a wrench, a knife, again, not a real knife, but something that looks, nice, one of those nice foam ones. And you ran a role-playing game based on that. Having those kind of props, having appropriate music in the background, some nice 50s swing music, if you want to set it in that time period. Maybe the characters all have actual characters, but for the sake of the sick person who's running this little facade, they were all given names out of the game Clue. They show up at the manor before they've had so much as of a chance to talk. The body is suddenly revealed. They didn't all arrive at the same time, and all of them have been out of sight of the others at one point or another. Just things that you can do to invoke a bit of mystery, sure. But if you find something to give them an attachment, add unknown elements that prey on their imaginations, and then ramp up the atmosphere, you can run a scary game. It's best if you know your fellow players, but you can do scary in a role-playing game. It's just one of the harder things to do. It takes a bit of work, but it can be done. So, that's my take on today's word. Thank you for listening to me. I appreciate it. And I will see you the next time I crawl in front of the internet and make one of these videos. Thank you, and farewell.